All right. It's a few minutes past 3, so let us start. I would like to welcome you all to the Relational Matters Archive conversation number 6. It's a great pleasure to be here again online with you all. And in this session, we engage in a more collective conversation. Today, I will talk with a student group from the Research Master Program in Gender Studies at Utrecht University. Specifically, I will talk to Cecilia Heil, Samira Hesse, Noah Mess, and Heike de Witt. And there was a 5th student with us in the group, Andromachi. Unfortunately, she is sick today, so she cannot participate, but she's with us in spirit. And I'm very happy that you're all here. My name is Katrin Thiele. I'm the initiator of this project, and I'm also teaching and researching in the Graduate Gender Program at Utrecht University. And here with us is also Ida Hillerop-Hansen, PhD researcher at Utrecht University and co-organizer of the Relational Matters Archive. Ida will oversee the technical details in these sessions and also moderate the session's chat, which can be used by all the live participants who otherwise cannot participate here, but please use the chat whenever you can. And Ida, do you want to say a few more things about the format and the technical questions?
Sure. So, Relational Matters Archive is a series that's been running through the spring and summer 2022. The conversations are recorded and they are available online in the archive on the Relational Matters webpage, where you can also go and learn more about the project. So each conversation is loosely structured around the same 3 questions, and it lasts up until 45 minutes. Then it will be followed by a 10 to 15 minutes Q&A. So we all encourage all the attendees to share their thoughts and questions in the chat, and then we will try to go through as many as time allows us. And we also ask you to not switch on your camera or audio during the conversation. Yeah, I will give the floor to Katrin and the group.
Before we start our conversation, let me start by way of introducing a little bit what the Relational Matters Archive aims to do, the work it also hopes to do, and also introduce to you today's interlocutors. The Relational Matters Archive aims to collect insights and divergent practices dealing with relationality as a starting point for research inquiries and ways of living. The archive is part of a project in which 2 claims are interwoven in the attempt to engage with and attune ourselves to today's planetary condition. On the one hand, an engagement with relational matters, which expresses an insistence on the interactive and messily entangled conditions of current times. And on the other hand, the statement for me that relation matters, meant as an ethical political wager to become more literate and more carefully attuned to what entanglement as living condition implies. That is, what does such a claim ask from us when living it? It's important to emphasize that to take a relational point of departure does not propose relationality as a solution in itself. Rather, all of these conversations around relational matters want to inquire what relationality means in specific contexts and on different scales, and how a relational approach could offer significant insights to what is happening around, amongst, and within us. I look very much forward having today the opportunity to talk with a group of students with whom I worked throughout the last period here in Utrecht this year on what we call in our program a study tutorial on relationality and becoming. Cecilia, Samira, but also Andromachi, who is not here with us, and Heike and Noah reached out to me after they saw the Relational Matters Archive for the first time happening. I think at least that I tell the story here correctly, but they not. And they wondered if I would be up for a student-led tutorial with them around the thematics. I happily agreed, and they put together a fantastic reading list, which then became a full-blown course syllabus in which they had weekly discussions by themselves and bi-weekly meetings with me. When we started the tutorial together, I suggested that maybe instead of the usual individual assignments that are common in the university system, what could be the end project of this tutorial is that we could do one of those conversation sessions together. I was more than happy that all 5 of you were very excited about this option, and so here we are. The format doesn't really allow much more introductory word, but let me say that as much, at least, that Cecilia, Samira, Heike, and Noah, and also Andromachi are right now completing their first year of study in the 2-year Research Master Gender Studies at Utrecht University. They all have different backgrounds and also come from different places, but they seem to share a deep concern for matters of relationality, connections, nature-culture thinking, an opening towards becoming otherwise, and a different manner of engaging with knowledges in this world. I very much hope that their voices will be heard widely in the archive, as our archive cherishes plurivocal and transgenerational interventions. So without further ado now, I think it's time that we start our conversation with the first question that gets us started in these sessions around relational matters. So I will read out the question as I always do, namely, how does relationality figure in your works, your lives, or your praxis? How would you say are you engaged or would want to be engaged with relationality? Or from which angle do you connect with relational matters? Now, someone has to start from you.
All right, that's going to be me. So as you already said in your introduction, we touched upon so many different elements within this tutorial that it's really hard to pick out only a few that kind of summarize the thoughts we had and to answer this question. So I'm just going to start with one and we can just see where that takes us. So something that was for me very interesting in our tutorial was the idea of our body and its position in the world, be it our body and how we relate to it ourselves, but also our body within a larger context of nature and environment around us. The idea, for instance, of the transcorporeality that Alaimo touches upon interested me a lot. I remember discussing with you in one of the meetings that I think we had without you, Katrin, one of Alaimo's formulations about the interchanges and interconnections of nature and bodies. And we discussed this idea of exchange and at the same time of truly having a two-way kind of communication that takes place, being not just the human in a world that can then be exploited or treated as a resource, but instead this very interwoven and back and forth kind of interchanging. That was very, very interesting to me. I love this idea of seeing the body as situated in a bigger something, and then the idea of material became a big topic, which we talked about quite a bit. Yeah, this was a great new topic for me that I hadn't really thought about so much before. That was really something that this tutorial brought to my thinking.
Yeah, and I think for me also, as you are talking, Cecilia, about like the body, like one of the main things of doing this tutorial, also in the format of a tutorial, was to be in a small group, which is a specific form of relating that is kind of intimate, especially our personal meetings, which were like also in our living rooms, for example, and where we also had the room and the space to ask these personal questions to each other. So also what Cecilia touches upon about the body, also really talking to each other. How do you connect to your body? How do you see your body in and of the world? Which helps to sometimes take a bit of a step away from the text towards the personal life of someone, through which you then again understand also the text, the theory better, and learn from one another also, one another's way of being in the world, I would say.
Yeah, totally. I remember also when we discussed becoming, that we also talked a bit about how could we kind of relate becoming to like our own becoming, our becoming ourselves, or our kind of journey towards who we want to be. And that was so interesting. And I think you're absolutely right. That was only possible because we were in such a small, comfortable setting. But I think that first block of our tutorial, which was about the theme of becoming, yeah, gave some very interesting insights on that regard too. I remember talking a lot about this idea of the non-linear and non-hierarchical becoming, as we kind of derived it from the text we read by Deleuze and Guattari, and that we thought about how that could motivate our own life as not having to be so linear and so hierarchical, climbing the steps, but instead could be a bit sideways and all over the place. I thought that was another very encouraging class. I think we all went home a bit relieved, not having to follow a linear path. I think you're still muted, Kathleen.
I want to, it's nice what you're saying. I said, I want to go maybe a little bit further into what you started with, namely that the concern around the body seemed throughout our conversation so far very much at the center of how you, from where you start the concern for relations and relationality. And you explained it already quite well in terms of the situatedness, etc. But can I ask just, what comes to your mind really I'm really intrigued about that you emphasize these discussions from our conversations on relationality, how you connect, the body. Can you say a little bit more about the body as a way in for you to think about relationality? Can you say still a little bit more about that? I would want to ask.
I have a small point. Maybe Noah, just jump in whenever you want. So I think for me, one of the elements that made this really interesting was this idea that the body as material, the body as matter, is kind of this one thing. And then here there's the self, the me, somehow living in it, with it, through it. And this relation, so and again, in a way, this isn't a question of relationality to oneself, almost to one's own body, that we've started discussing. This idea of, what do you do when your body doesn't do what you want it to, or isn't the way you want it to, or how can the body be an obstacle? And at the same time, how is the body also what enables us to experience so much, and what is kind of our gateway into a material world? And that was so interesting because it brought relationality onto this micro level of the self somehow. And then, of course, the body is also existing in a larger world of other bodies, human bodies, other than human bodies, material, and so on. And there we have to navigate a world of something that I think in many branches of thought has not been paid a lot of attention to. But then in these works that we read, all of a sudden the matter around us matters. And all of a sudden there's something there that makes our physical body again be in touch with something that's more than just something, but is instead something worth paying attention to. Yeah, this is a bit vague, but it was very interesting to dive into all of that, I thought.
Oh, wonderful. Does anyone want to add something to this line of thought? Heike, please. You're muted still.
Yeah. I was thinking about, or I keep thinking about something you said, Catherine, that was the self is constituted through all others, and others being not only human others, but the entire environment that surrounds us. And a thought I'm very much a fan of is not having a body, but being a body, and kind of exploring what that entails. And also, Samira, I think you described really wonderfully also this limitation or this tension with agency of one's body, and that indeed you can come up against moments where there's an incongruence with what you want to do and what you are able to do. And I think in this way, the sense of becoming also is so interesting in its sense of transformation and changes across time in general. So I thought it was really fun to discuss this together.
Yes. If I may add something, because you gave us also, of course, reading, and in the second reading we read this text also throughout the tutorial, and but I wasn't part of that session when you discussed it, I believe. So I reread it now again, and for this session, and for the first time also in resonance to our conversations, I felt, Chimera is a thinker, an indigenous thinker who very much emphasizes the notion of reciprocity. And what I hear here is very much, I think, relatable to this idea of reciprocity, because on the one hand, I always have a little bit of an issue with reciprocity when I would understand it as that you have to equal the exchanges, everything has to be equal to each other, in that sense reciprocal. But I think what Chimera, I think, gestures too much more is what you're describing, namely that everything is reciprocal in the sense, or everything should be understood as reciprocal in the sense that there are agencies from all sides. So it's not, something is clearly non-active and the other side is really active, but the reciprocity that we are dealing with what Chimera would say, an animate, always with animacy, an animate environment or context, is what I think I felt very much described in terms of the ideas around how you took also these texts and took also the question of relationality really towards yourself, and thinking also about the body that often in the Western traditions, of course, is taken, as you say, Cecilia, as matter or as that thing, instead of, and then separated from the self that is active in it also, and how that helped you to connect these. So that's, I think, a very nice connection already to the things. Cecilia, you are nodding a lot. Do you want to have the last word on this before we move on?
I not necessarily have much to add, but exactly this, I think, was also such a nice thing to spend some time on and to really think into, and to, in the end, realize, the position that the human has in lots of the thought we have been confronted with so far, and then what difference it makes to open yourself up to a couple other thinkers' ideas, and all of a sudden the world is so much more complex and there's so much different stuff going on. That was something that I really felt in this tutorial.
Great. And I think, this leads us already to our second question, in a way, in this archive, namely the more methodological or also practical shifts that you might now reflect on or might think of, that you see emerging from a more relational approach in your daily, but also in your research or in your activist lives and practices also. This question is really meant to open up a form of, becoming a little bit more precise. What's happening actually when we start from a relational, starting point? As I say, it does not have to be any solution, but it is something that does hopefully something. So I would be interested in what you come up with.
I can start here with saying what you already addressed, Catherine, with an animate world. I think that is, that gives such a different starting point to encountering all others, and to encountering difference, as well as indeed essential somehow from all sides. Also relates to, for example, the concept of earth beings that I think Haraway kind of re-emphasizes, and Marisol de la Candena also calls them Tiarcuna. So this idea of beings, or this shift away from objectification and seeing things as agent, really, I think is a huge change. And then Canberra's investment in the concept of diffraction has helped me a lot to give a framework to my thinking, because I often think associatively. So I jump from one thing to the other, and somehow they are connected. And I often have to take a step back to see, but then how are they connected? Am I just making this up? Yes, but then how? And how can I make it work in a way that is productive and not conflating two things together, but actually making them weave together, or I often understand diffraction through this rippling effect and the merging of these ripples in the water. So that really helps structure my thinking and structure my approaches to writing and designing and associating certain bodies of thought, but also associating myself to them, because as a body, and as a body that looks like this and comes from here, it does something to engage with certain knowledges, for example, indigenous knowledges, and that's an engagement that I'm very like eager to do. But then what does it do is still a question that remains.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I would like to add a bit onto that. Because I think, yeah, relationality is absolutely not like the holy grail with all the answers. I think it's really the opposite, actually. It raises just so many new questions, and it's really a way of thinking in different ways about, I don't know, how things are related, which is, I don't know, then like super interesting, and also raises then a lot of ethical issues, right? Because it really matters how we relate to each other. I think that's also something we really discovered in our tutorial, which was, I don't know, just really, really nice. Yes.
How did you discover it, Samira? Tell a bit more. What was shifting then for you?
Yeah, I think for me it really came also in when we talked about indigenous knowledges and like the politics of citation, so that even in like even when we speak in Western academia about relationality, especially like in new materialism, for example, we need to be super like conscious that we don't reproduce coloniality again. Even though we think like, oh, we are so aware of all these relations, it doesn't really end there. It's really just the start. So there, I think where it really became for me very prominent. Yes.
Lovely. I want to bring together the both of you a little bit to get you further a little bit still in this discussion, because what I hear is very much what I like to hear is that what I think also these conversations have brought about in the past with other speakers, to take a relational approach is not just a theoretical framing. It is really something is shifting indeed as how you have to practice this, or what it matters to the practice that you pursue with a relational approach. And you spoke about ethical, questions of ethics, but you also spoke about that, for example, Heike, when you said like, well, how to stay creative in your thinking and not be, not be maybe limited by saying, well, I should normally, as it is in knowledge traditions, hegemonic knowledge tradition, to separate things out, but you really want to bring them together. But how to do this? And maybe a relational approach, and you spoke about Barat's approach of diffractive thinking, helps to actually get to a more precise, you wish for a more precise analysis, so to speak, of how things are really related. And that does not lead so much to solutions, as you say, but this leads more to always further questions. And I want to repeat it now, what I think you both have given us, but I want you to come in now again and say a little bit more. So can you give us examples maybe of can you give us further examples? I see that either Heike or Cecilia want to speak, and maybe Noah too.
Can I jump in with a very small practical element that struck me so much?
Course.
When we also actually derived from Kimmerer's work and the idea of the language we use when addressing the natural world around us, or creatures, beings, and then this thinking about grammar and the language we use and how it structures our relation to the nature around us, to the beings around us. So for example, moving away from a term like it, often used in the English language to designate animals, plants, whatever. So like you said, Heike, already, like moving away from an objectification, and instead Kimmerer suggests creative terminology derived from indigenous languages that have a more agential, more kind of subjectful tone to them instead of the it. And that I thought was such an interesting thought trigger to just checking the language we use in these moments. And actually, since reading the text, I've caught myself a couple times talking about a dog and saying it and being, no, I'm in he or her or them, and trying to correct my language away from the it already on that level. So I think that will stay with me for quite a while.
Wonderful, thanks. Who wants to say a few more things? Heike?
I wanted to prompt Noah actually to speak, because I think what you wrote about metaphors and the interaction of language with, or your specific reading of metaphors, also together with Eva Hayward, I thought was fantastic, and I want you to say something about this.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think I'm always interested in art and literature, and the metaphors and figures and symbols used in them, but try not to read them as only kind of the linguistic, playful aesthetics that play in this realm of ideas and language, but rather see them as very material. So a metaphor is not using, for example, a dog to explain something about a human, but to really see them as becoming together within this metaphor that's already material, semiotic, and therefore also seeing art or literature in which metaphors are used not as these texts where you try to find the meaning of the metaphor of the text, but as really speaking to you, as really doing something and finding what it produces also, what ways of being with the text, being with figures and metaphors it produces, and also makes you see the world a bit differently, I would say. Yeah, so that also really helped me in the way, even when you write papers about art or literature, to see them as really things that speak to you and not trying to find the meaning in it.
Wonderful, yeah, wonderful thought. Yes, very nice how this does something to you. Samira also wanted to say still something. We have still, let's take the time.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, just very quick, because
don't take it.
Cecilia, what you said about like the chimera text and the use of language, I remember that we also talked about, you know, how then the reaction like often comes of like, oh, but then you're humanizing everything. But I think the text also really shows that that's really not the point. It's really more about like broadening animacy to other than human beings and like decentering the human actually. And I think the text really nicely shows that here through language.
Yes. And I, of course, very much resonate also with that in the sense of that, you know, also Chimera speaks about, you know, world differently. And I think that is really not such a, that might be really a shifting that happens with a more relational approach, that we do not separate out either what's language and what's the matter that we are talking about, not only on that level, but also as you described, you know, that, you know, by saying specific grammatically correct things, we also objectify or also, you know, set up the scene in a certain way, and that limits our thing. And to poke through this, to kind of, you know, to have an idea about, we need maybe, you know, that is what at least what Chimera would say, we need a more relational or reciprocal in her language, in her vocabulary, I would say. We need that. Wonderful. Does anyone want to, Heike once more, or anybody? No? I don't want to stop this if you want to. No. Very fine. I mean, we spoke now very positively about the, you know, the relationality and the becoming and the relational approaches on a methodological level, or also a practical level, what changes in us or with us by engaging with them. But the third question is also very important for us to consider, namely where do you might see dangers or tensions or also limitations by taking relationality as a starting point. For both, I mean, maybe now really also, again, try, you know, I would love to hear more, you know, more about your own interest and about your own research questions or your practices in life. Where do you see there's something you want to be aware of, or you see some dangers also when we think relationality?
Yeah, for me, I was like, yeah, I don't know, like thinking a lot about the possible like coloniality that is that could be like reproduced through movements like new materialism, like, and then I really thought about the word new materialism, like already. So like to what extent it is really so new, because of course it actually, I don't know, like many indigenous thinkers already thought about relationality long before, are still thinking about it. So in that case, it's really not that new, and that newness should really not be like a universal temporal claim. But then I also thought, hey, but maybe we can also, I don't know, take it very affirmatively and rethink it a little bit. So yeah, so that it's not a like temporal claim, but rather like a recognition of one's own like not knowing, so that within the like situatedness of new materialism within Western academia, that thinking of relationality might be like a bit new in the sense that maybe we, or yeah, I don't know, many thought traditions were not aware of it before, and we now come to knowledge a little bit, but also to see that maybe this newness is then also really the importance why, or like, yeah, one of the many reasons why we really need also other knowledges and listen to other knowledges, like, for example, from indigenous sources, because there are things that we don't know, and recognizing that limitation is, I think, super relevant, especially for Western academia. So yeah, I don't know, and I think then very often when I engage with indigenous like texts, then it's often very difficult, I think, like to really understand it and engage with it, because very often I think like, oh, the starting point is very different. But I think even that is such a valuable experience to sometimes see like, okay, there is a limitation, there's something that I don't understand. For example, when they use, I don't know, a certain concept that is also like, again, that stems from an indigenous language word. So I think in the Chimera text, there's also one. And sometimes it's really difficult to understand because the experiences behind it are so different, right? But I think really engaging with that awareness of not knowing something and seeing your own limitations of your own situatedness is very, very important. And I think that's, on the one hand, maybe a challenge, but also, I don't know, a very fruitful one, I think, and a good friction to think with.
Nice. Yeah, and also, I mean, I want to hear more, but I also want to say that, you know, that it is not, I mean, we speak always from specific context, and for, you know, exactly in a Western academic field in which we have met, and in which you encounter maybe these traditions of these, you know, newer traditions of feminist thinking, queer feminist thinking, such as new materialism, then they indeed are presented as if they are something new. But and we think that is a conceptual framework we have to understand. But I think when we engaged with other than Western knowledges in the tutorial, then we also realized that, you know, that the language is not more difficult, or the language is not more other, but we also need to have a context, as much of a context, when we want to understand what, for example, when Heike before spoke about diffraction, you know, why should that be known, instead of key by, you know, a word that Chimera suggests, instead of, you know, to make the language more animate, so for example. And thus we also learned, I think, or kind of, I would like to say, the danger is that, you know, the new indeed should not be, also for me, the new is not something that I find that it's new. It is maybe a second reflection on certain issues that we are, or a second or third or fifth reflection on something that is anyway the problem. And maybe, as you say, Samira, it's a chance, what we also tried in our discussions together, it's a chance to also, in that sense, cross over to other things that we do not know, because this notion of relationality is indeed very central in Western thinking, but more as a problem, how to get there, rather than as something that we always already in some way are constituted by. This is how we also started. But someone else, please. Where are more dangers and tensions? Heike.
Yeah, also in response to this a little bit, is that, for example, the notion of becoming also helps me to understand how situatedness is something that is not fixed, and that through engaging with these knowledges, we might be moved into different understandings and different sort of starting points. But indeed, the road, or that traveling is has a lot of frictions and a lot of power dynamics within it, and also is very reliant on access. to knowledges, and access to producing knowledge as well. So I think there always remains a tension of what can be known, or who can produce knowledge, which as students you always have to navigate in a sense.
Very nice, thank you, Heike. A very important thing that we also discussed at length together, namely the question of that relationality is not per se indeed a notion of equality, that actually most relations that we are living are precisely not that. That's why they become something to engage with, to have a concern with, and that's the same as you say with knowledge. Is very nice. Who else wants to? Yes, Noah, please.
I also want to say, and I'm not already like knowing exactly this thought, I'm still thinking about it a lot, but I feel like relationality also as a word often, and also like concepts such as becoming together, coming with, or species meet, often have this notion of like touching, of proximity, of this movement of coming together and then either creating friction or harmony. And then this question of what is the place of silence or withdrawal within relationality, because it's still a way of relating, but maybe the word of relationality doesn't make you think of these kind of actions, like the moving away, the not facing each other, but facing away, being silent consciously on topics, is something that still really interests me. I might be like, not a limit, but maybe a boundary of the relationality theme. It's really interesting to me.
Yes, very nice. I very much can see that. Yes, Samira, please.
Yes, and I think that also brings me also a little bit back to the question of the body that we had, and that was very, present in all our discussions, because sometimes it's also really difficult to to bear your body, when it's, for example, hurting or itching or whatever, because I was thinking a lot about the negativity and positivity of our senses, that kind of also matters. And I also thought that, maybe they're not necessarily like working against each other, but sometimes the negativity of a sense negativity, such as pain, for example, also can be like a call for attention and caretaking and healing. But sometimes it's also, you cannot always take care of everything. I think sometimes we all have these moments where we don't have enough energy for that, and where we actually want that, escapism a little bit, for example with books, or we watch a movie or something, to kind of escape to escaping our bodies a little bit, or to distance us a bit from our body. And I think while it's on the one hand moving away from one part of us, I think we also move towards then something else, which would then be maybe more the immaterial side of us. So I was also, I think many of us were thinking a lot about, okay, what role does the immaterial play in materialism? And there, this negotiation became very visible for me, how this escapism may also really be a moving towards our immaterial side sometimes. And yeah, I think that's also our own multiplicity within us.
Nice, very nice answers and very nice responses. Cecilia, do you also still feel something to say? Just interesting.
Noah actually said exactly what I was thinking about 5 minutes earlier, namely this, where's the place also of, you said silence, I thought more like distance or solitude, but yeah, exactly. So how can we not feel selfish or we're ignoring a whole world, literally, if we just want to be with ourselves at some point? So this also connects to what you said, Samira, in a different way. And I think there's no answer to that. I think that's just something that maybe with all these texts and with these thoughts we've had in this tutorial remain to be negotiated and explored, and definitely something that yeah, poses a challenge. I think the more you think about it, the more you realize you can't actually really take this distance, probably, and perhaps the harder it gets. But yeah, very, very interesting. And again, like you all summarized my thoughts perfectly.
I like your answers very much, because they all show indeed also that you experience, that we experience together, but also experience on your own, in your own thinking, you know, certain limitations, because it is always, and we had this also as a theme throughout these conversations, I would say, that indeed, as you started off answering this question, that relationality always emphasized this kind of coming together, being together, you know, kind of, you know, there might be frictions, but it's always this, you know, with or so. And is this something that remains in opposition to, for example, withdrawal, or, you know, solitude, or, you know, as really pain and escape of something? And is that maybe the non-relational, or is that something that indeed maybe leads to another kind of relationality that you would like to explore further? I think is precisely what you said, Samira, as the immaterial. That is really, you know, what you described as the immaterial here is really something that, you know, you can, one I think has to explore further, in the sense of, you know, what do we actually speak about when we speak about relationality? And, you know, there are different aspects of also the question, of course, that you brought in the beginning, also saying, you know, well, relationality is not a solution as such, as I would say, or you say Holy Grail. It is exactly the problem, but it is also something that is always situated, and that we have, you know, only specifically in specific ways access to. But then there's also this, that, you know, other things come up in our minds. What is then not relational? And do we want to, you know, is there only relationality, or is there something else? So I really like these answers, because these, when one thing that I find very important in my own work on relational matters is that it came out of an interest to affirm differences, and also to be attentive to differentiality much more. And I wanted to at some point turn this a little bit more around and think like, okay, I cannot not see that there are relations also in these, amongst these, between or amongst these differences. So how not to suppress differences over relationality? And I also hear this from you, in a sense of, you know, that the coming together cannot be in opposition to these other sides that you find just being as relational matters as those sides of relationality that we visited together. It's a wonderful conversation, but it's short, and so we reached the limit of our conversation. So now we would like to ask maybe Ida and maybe one of you in the audience might want to ask a question or make a comment to my wonderful interlocutors, or to us. Otherwise, maybe Ida wants to still ask a question, and if not, we can just round off things, whatever comes up.
Yes, I will just give a minute for someone to share a question. But in the meantime, maybe I can go. Thank you, first of all, for this great conversation. It was actually really nice to do this different setup also, because we've been so used to doing sort of only two conversational partners. But I really enjoyed the reading that you've shared. I thought what was also brought up, the relevance of by the author's account, indigenous philosophy to this topic was, yeah, striking. But I also was struck by how interesting it was that the author, or Kimura, was using this moment of teaching, or the space of teaching, really as a mode of engagement, which of course resonates with what you're doing here. I mean, my question was really just on the observation that setting up a tutorial like this is such a wonderful commitment exactly to relationality. And I guess I'm curious about the more sort of practical, pedagogical lessons that you might have learned also in setting up a space like this. The commitment to, of course, or the acknowledgement in it that we never learn in isolation, but really to explicate it here, how we rely on each other's thoughts and presence. But also just really in practical terms, how did you set up this space? How did you work out a kind of framework that would help you also check in with each other where you were in emotional, bodily terms when you came to it? and how that sort of framed your your way of relating. Yeah.
I think this is a wonderful question to have a final round for all of you, really to say something about that. Thank you, Ida. That's a lovely, really lovely question. Also because it speaks also to that I also thought that the Chimera text speaks about an encounter with students as a teacher. So yes, I think it's very fitting. So please, whoever wants to start.
I can go if no one wants to start. I thought your question was great, because I think when we began the tutorial, I think we were also not quite sure yet how it was gonna pan out. I remember the first week we had really difficult readings. We met, or the first week that we met alone without Katrin, we had difficult readings. I remember arriving at the session being really scared, what the hell are we gonna do with this text? And I remember leaving so much more calm, but also feeling like we'd actually together worked out so many questions. And I was so proud of us. And I think that happened every week we met. So I think that was just one of the things that for me was most striking, that we met, as academic babies that we are, we're really at the beginning of all the things we can learn. And just with questions that everyone kind of brought, with some quotes that struck people the most that we collected in a document, we managed to talk through definitely never all of the text, and probably also not the most important elements, but those that interested or spoke to us most. And I think by doing so, we managed to all kind of try to connect to the text and to each other that way. And yeah, it was just surprisingly rewarding in an academic sense. Like, not was it just fun, but also there was actually a lot of work and understanding that slowly formed and kind of clicked into place as we went through the sessions.
Yeah, and we also then avoided the whole grading issue a little bit by just making the tutorial pass-fail, because I don't know, very often with grades it's so easy to compare yourself to the others and it gets very competitive, and we wanted to avoid that because it's, I don't know, I think grades are so emotionally loaded for many people. I think that also really helped to just, I don't know, that we wouldn't start with being competitive like from the beginning. And so I think we collaborated very nicely, and we also had spaces where we could also be vulnerable with each other and share vulnerability. And and then of course also the whole physical setup of being sometimes in a park or in Noah's living room. It was just very, I don't know, it was very, very nice and cozy, and a very different learning experience that, I don't know, was for me such a valuable thing. It was very great.
Yeah, I like that you also say this this collaborational aspect and the competitiveness, because another text I was really thinking for this meeting was from Anna Tsing, Contamination as Collaboration. And this idea of what is collaborating and how that works to form interactions of sort of exchanges and knowledge exchanges together, it really just interests me so much. And I think the commitment we all showed to this class was really also surprising to me and very wonderful. I often feel like I am very excited about things, and some people would call this nerdiness or something like this. And then this was really a space where I could just embrace this and embrace the happiness that learning new things or not understanding things also gives me. Yeah, so thank you for that, still in hindsight.
Yeah, and also adding to that, I think the act of creating your own syllabus was really interesting for us to do. I think also something I, at least, but I think all of us will take in with us to like new courses or things where normally you just present it with a format, a reading list, and you just do it, you start. And here, because of thinking, like, how is this constructed? How do we construct this? Which text do we choose in which weeks? You really appreciate more how these texts are chosen also, I think, and also feel more committed, as Heike said, like the commitment to doing this because you chose it yourself. I think I also feel this commitment more towards new courses now of like, wait, this teacher has really put very much thought in the syllabus, and I'm gonna think with them rather than just consume it or something. That really helped me.
Lovely answers.
Thank you for those wonderful answers. They're actually really moving, all the stuff we take from a space of learning and into it. Yeah, thank you for that.
And I think, you know, the experience also as a teacher, and I think that is also something that Chimera in the way it speaks about. I mean, as a teacher of in such a student-organized space, you indeed also realize that the more freedom there is, the more actually things come back. And I like very much, of course, that you also, you know, we are most of the time in academia in a certain setting in which courses have to be given. But I think these moments of self-designed courses, or really like smaller groups also in which you can meet in different places, that you have a different experience of those relations that you also, that knowledge needs in order indeed to get to you, to make you feel like we managed something and I can walk with something. That these are just very, very important to educational processes. And I very much like that they are now also in this archive, because I started the archive with with Viv Bozalek, who was very much all her professional life into this question of education. And I like that it matters really how we create those relations between teachers and students, between students, in learning conditions, in learning settings, so that you really feel that what we are doing is really something that we really walk with literally, and not just indeed try to consume or kind of make a check on every text that we have read. So thank you very much. I think it's time. We want to close the session before the hour. So thank you all for a wonderful session, especially, of course, Cecilia, Noah, Heike, and Samira here on the screen. And once more, we miss Andromachi. And both all of you, we get claps from Laura. Thank you so much for being here. This is not the last session of our first semester, we can say, if we do it in academic terms, or the summer first series of our Relational Matters archive. Ida and I are already thinking about what's to come, so please stay tuned. We'll announce a new series, I guess, definitely after the summer. I guess it will be early autumn, but we want to continue this because it was really rewarding also for us to have these conversations, and we really would like to continue. And everybody will be informed about this, and as usually also this conversation makes it, of course, up to the archive very soon on the Relational Matters Archive.nl website, where it can be watched and looked at and learned from.